Hey everyone, I just want to give this message before my video starts. Remember, life's just big one psychological warfare on yourself. Every single day you have to battle to overcome it. The most important moments of your life are the ones from now onwards. You have to take control of your mind and be on top of that because that's what controls everything. You have to be your own hero and overcome things. If you do this enough over time, you will achieve all of your goals and dreams. You will develop a mind that's so strong that nothing in life is going to be able to break you down or hurt you anymore, and you completely lose the victim's mindset. This is something I've been doing for a while now, and it's honestly done wonders for me. But that's not to say I still don't get bad days and dark days. I've had a few days where I felt quite down and I've not really been able to help myself. And I know that in my head I'm always alone, which is a lot of why I do so much work all the time and try and distract myself. Because I've really struggled just to be with my thoughts and alone at times. Like I'm my own biggest enemy. But where I know that, it means my mind's my most powerful weapon. So I have to use that to my advantage. Your mind's always going to have the edge over you because it knows you better than anyone else, so it can put you into dark situations really quick, which is something I struggle with again. I have to understand in the moment that if I'm feeling alone in my head and I'm around people, then I really need to fight my way out of it and start interacting with other people and coming back to the moment. Remember too, if you do need help, make sure you get some therapy too. But the moment you take control of your mind is the moment you take control of your life again. Like, I've suffered more than I could ever put into words with this, honestly. And it's something I'm never open about with people that actually know me in real life. Even now, it's one of the hardest things I have to do is put myself out here like this because it's just a lot to do and it's still painful reliving some of it. But if I know it's going to help people, then it's something that I'm always going to do. And all I want to get from my videos and my life's work is just to help other people avoid suffering like I have and see that I've come out to the other side of it and completely changed my mindset and that you can do it too and that I'm always going to be here to help you. So I just wanted to share that before the video started. I love you and hope you have a great day and enjoy these stories. I honestly don't know how to explain this strange handwritten letter I received last week. For my backstory, my family and I have been staying with my parents for 3 months because I've had some health problems. We didn't tell a lot of people because we were still in the same town and everyone was sheltering in place anyway. Last month, my mum told me I had received a letter in the mail and I could tell by her voice she was irritated and intrigued. It was strange that there was even mail there because I've only been there for a couple years. It was never the permanent home, and I hadn't been there for long. I head downstairs and she hands me a letter, addressed to me but using my maiden name. I've been married over 10 years and my name is now distinctly different. The return address is from Patty C. I don't know anyone by the name. Now to reiterate, my parents don't actually own this home, so we're obviously very interested to see the contents of the envelope. But I open it and unfold a handwritten letter. Well, it's a note on a 9.5 by 11 ruled notebook paper. The letter is very personal, so I won't write it out, but it goes into detail about my health and how this person cares deeply and is praying for me. She writes as though we're best friends. At the bottom it's signed with PS to call her anytime. Now my mum and I are so incredibly confused and concerned about this person, and I decide to call the number and a woman picks up and I ask for Patty C. The woman pauses and sighs and explains that her mother, Patty C, died 1.5 years ago. I immediately apologise, about to hang up. More bewildered than ever when this woman asks why I'm calling for her mother on her cell phone. I'm not sure what to say and stumble through an explanation about receiving a letter. Kim is silent for a while, then said she's only had this cell number for 6 months. Well, after her mother's passing. I apologise again and say there must have been a mistake. My mum and I decide to Google the address, and it's a small public park in town. I'm so confused by this, like honestly, I have no idea what this could be or what it means. Back in the late 80s, I was in college and lived in a dorm room. I never owned an Ouija board, but if someone had one, I'd either watch or participate. To be honest, this was one of the first times I used one. I had a question for the board. My grandmother had my father when she was young and single. That was a big deal in the late 1930s. When she found out she's pregnant, she ran away from home, dropped my father off at her parents' house when he was 6 months old and left, coming to visit less and less frequently. By the time he was 5, she never come back at all and disappeared. So my father was raised by an aunt, never really knew his mother, and didn't have any idea who his father was. By the time he's in his late 40s, he wanted to find her. Lots of dead ends, and this was frustrating. Anyway, that night, I asked the board if my grandmother's alive, and it said yes. I asked if she lives in my home state, the board said yes. I asked if she lived in my hometown, and it said yes. I say what street she lived on. It spelled out the name of a street. I'll just call it Washington Street. The real name was very uncommon. Now at the time, I wasn't really sure if there was a Washington Street in my hometown. Turns out there was. No, Grandma didn't live there, but 2 years later, my father found his mum. She lived in my home state, in the town of Washington. It wasn't the street name, it was the town name. But how messed up is that? More than 30 years later, I still have no explanation for this. Hey everyone, this story is long and requires a lot of context, but be patient because it's worth it. I created this count to really talk about a couple of things that I've been through in the last 2 years because frankly, I've started to forget some of my older experiences from new ones piling up. Chronologically, this is like my 8th or 9th one now, and I want to share it. This story takes place at a cabin in Vermont. 1 room, 16 by 16, lofted area, wood stove for heat, no running water, attachment with a compositing toilet pretty far away, nestled into a dirt road off a dirt road. Both are from former login roads. Now, my girlfriend found the place on CL and wanted to move into it together because, in lieu of rent, we could provide 8 hours of labour a week to the landlord. I like the adventure and wild settings, and I was nervous that if she went in without me, she's going to be over her head. The backstory on the cabin is that it was built by a man, initials DC, in the mid-70s. DC suffered from schizophrenia and lived in the cabin while renting out another cabin for some property income. Somewhere along the lines, he had a couple renting his property who couldn't actually pay and wouldn't move out, and it upsets him. While they were gone, he burned their home to the ground. In the fallout, their relationship ended and they drifted away. DC built another cabin, a shack really, which is 2 4x8 rooms with a 7-foot ceiling adjacent to the rubble, and moves in. I assumed that was so he could rent out the larger cabin, but no one I spoke to about it could actually confirm so. Most of the history comes from the landlord who briefly knew DC, and a college friend of his who lives on the mountain in a shack made out of some tarps and plastic with a propane cooking stove for heat. Now he's a dear humble man and beautiful artist who did not like talking to strangers, but he and I connect over the love of nature and our willingness to get the aesthetic in the pursuit of freedom. The shack stands on the property, but the roof is full of holes and is terribly rotten. It is frankly questionable how a structure as unsound as this stays up, but it does. The shack overlooks the cabin and can be seen looking out from the bathroom window and the southwest window in the main cabin. It was unearthly to see in the moonlight. This story takes place on November 18th of last year, roughly 2 weeks after my girlfriend and I moved in. Kay's my girlfriend. Well, I'm just going to call her that for this. Kay had some problems, and still does. I loved her dearly, though, and at this point in time we were inseparable. The day started normally. She went to work and I stayed home, gave the dog a bath. A statty stopped by looking for her, second time she was out, and delivered a card. I texted her a photo and told her to get in touch without thinking, and that sets her off. I had to go to work, so I sent her a message that said I trusted her and would see her later. I went to work with the landlord, a mean old POS of the bad yogi variety, and left my phone in my coat. We were bucking logs and splitting wood, which was warm work that day, as the old saying goes, so I tossed my coat to the side. I don't hear my phone ring. When we're done splitting wood, he needed my help to drop off a car for his repair. He needed my help because he doesn't have friends and the place we're going was at some random rustic shop, because he thought he could make the guy work for extra cheap. On the way back, I finally took a look at my phone, and there's one message you never ever want to see, a suicidal note. We got back to the mountain and I'm at a loss. My car had been sitting since the day I brought it over because the battery is dead. It had no gas in it because I forgot my wallet. The last time I drove it to her and the car, the reliable one. So that's wherever she is and she won't answer my text messages. I try calling her relatives but no luck. So I mentioned the pre-attempt to the landlord and he cracks a joke that she's already gone before covering up with a very hollow, it's usually nothing. He says I can have a half gallon of gas from a gas can and he'll give me a jump, but that's it. I honestly don't care, because it was enough to get me moving. I'm in no mood for jokes. So I set out. Jumper K was in the passenger seat, $3 in my pocket for gas. Literally all I had at this point, because you don't work for rent if you're flush with cash. I white-knuckled it to town, praying with my soul that she's alright. I drove all the way over to the spots with no luck, and went to the bar where her sister works to try and find her. She wasn't working, so I gave the bartender my number and say to reach out if he sees her and that it's urgent. Then I went to Kay's work and asked how she was when she left. Her employer told me that she left bitterly, swearing that she was going to end it, but she hadn't done anything because it didn't seem important. Now I'll let that sit there for a moment. Then a glimmer of hope. Her sister had heard from her, a single text message with the letter S. After roughly 5 hours up against it, we knew she was still breathing. You can't imagine the relief I felt, so I went home to wait, kept on texting her encouragement. Night fell, and I was in the cabin alone waiting. I'm a little bit of a poet, so I finally sent this poem. Sweet baby girl, out on your own. Who knows the way that you're going to be guided back home? We love you, we miss you. Our beating hearts have flown out from our cheeks to seek our missing one. She then came home, half an hour later, staggering through the door, falling into my arms, sobbing. She said that she had stopped there 3 times on her way up to the mountain because she didn't have the strength to return. I asked her how she was, and she said she felt heavy and cold, like she'd fallen down a dark hole. She said she couldn't find her way out, that she lost the light. I specifically remember her saying she felt like something was trying to swallow her and wouldn't let go. Then she looks at me and says she thought that something from the cabin or mountain was attacking her through the Ouija board. At this point, I felt thoroughly fed up against it. Her Ouija board is over 100 years old, one of the original ones made out of a single piece of wood. I had seen it once or twice and didn't like it much, because my background is kind of Christian and it strongly believes in the existence of demons and spirits. Now, depending on who you ask, an Ouija board is like a direct door to hell. Her board is stored in a closet under the cabin, reachable only by steep dirt paths, tucked in any one of a random assortment of boxes. The last time that Kay went down there, she very nearly fell onto a pair of scissors. To put it bluntly, there were bad vibes and they're strong, so I told her I would deal with it if she agreed to follow my orders until we were done. She was nearly dead on her feet and agreed. The first thing I did was climb into the loft and got my crucifix. It was a gift from a man I met walking my dog, passed down to him from his German grandmother, who had blessed it by a Catholic priest. I have another story about the crucifix, but it's not for today. I sit her on the couch and hand her the crucifix, with the order to hold it in front of her and not say anything. My father is a pastor. My mother is a devote, so I called them. I told my mum the situation, and she said, "You can't exercise a board because it's inherently evil," to which I replied, "I know, but I can drive away anything coming through it and bind its power." I tell her to pray for me for my protection and success, and she said she would. I cleared my desk so I had a place to put the board when I get back, laid my Bible on it to be ready to hand. I put on my coat and look at the front door. I didn't want to go out. I can't tell you how much I did not want to. The board made me feel uncomfortable on a good day. Now, I had to go to find it in the closet in the dark by myself with full knowledge that it's trying to kill my girlfriend. I put on a crappy headlamp, muster my courage and step out. It was dark, there was a slight breeze, and the area felt heavy. Imagine the feeling of resistance of walking into a heavy wind, but without the wind to justify the intensity. Now, I shuffled down the embankment to the closet, took a deep breath and opened the door. The headlamp only lit half the space, and I didn't enjoy that. Fortunately for me, the board was in the first box I opened. We kept it wrapped up in a purple piece of wool with moon and stars on it, that I got from the man who gave me the crucifix, with the intention of keeping it, both tucked away and relatively spaced away from everything. Now, unfortunately for me, it's half unwrapped, and the naked board is hanging out in the cold. I picked it up by the covered part and wrapped it up. I took one step and something happened. I say something because it felt like I stumbled, but I didn't. I was anticipating and don't want to drop the board, so I was moving very slow, but I put my foot down and had to brace myself and keep from falling over. The second step was much the same, and I can't really describe it because I didn't feel a hand or a shove, and my feet didn't slip or slide, but my balance was all over. I carefully climbed up the embankment, went back in, and set the board in the spot I'd made for it. I unwrapped the board, placed my Bible directly between me and it. I sat down, put my hands flat on my desk, and wait for it. I cast out the evil. I bound out the board with the most powerful, clear, distinct language I can. Dealing with an evil spirit is like a wish of a genie, and you really don't want to leave loops. As soon as I stop speaking, the heavy feeling that had been lingering over me vanishes. I wrapped the board up and asked Kay if it worked. She smiles and nodded, and said that she could see the light again and was feeling better. Now there's one last wrinkle I wanted to leave you with, and I swear this is true. The night before that all happened, I had a dream that I ran out onto a pier into the ocean through fierce winds, crashing waves to get to Kay. I carried her back as storm winds howled and tried to get us back out of the sea. When we made it to land and looked for shelter, I opened the door in a pillar and thrust her ahead of me. Then I went in and found the room full of people in historical garb, some 1920s era, some earlier. I want to say there were 12 or 13, but it was a dream, so I can't remember. I do remember a little boy, newsy style, with a thick blood coming down from under his cap and a very haunting look in his eye. I opened the door and pulled us both from the room, and that's when I woke up. Here's how my mother tells it. It's 1979, when my mother was 15 or 16. A larger group of my extended family are gathered in my grandma's house in rural Iowa, where most of them lived. They were there to discuss what was to be done with my recently deceased grandmother's house. You see, my great-grandmother hated the house, and so, in the final 6 months of her life, had built another house on the same plot of land, which I guess wasn't in accordance with the state's plot laws. As any logical thinker would do, they decided to ask my great-grandmother herself. A Ouija board in hand, the female members of the family walked out into the night to do their seance, which was just down the dirt road from where they were. The house was built in the mid-19th century, had 6 bedrooms, was huge from what I can gather. However, it doesn't have electricity, so they brought candles to light the space. About half of the women were there in attendance and are believers, with the other half being skeptics. This leads to some frustration with the asking of questions to the Ouija board. However, sometime in the night, the energy of the house totally changes. One of my aunts asks if Margaret was there, and they don't get a response from the board. Instead, a piece of tinsel on the doorway starts to swing as though it's a pendulum. It would be easy to say it was the wind or atmospheric pressure that could have accounted for the change. However, keep in mind it's a large house and the rooms surrounding the central living room acted as a wind block. It's also worthwhile to point out that the candles at this point flickered or went out. The movement continues with every question, back and forth like a pendulum. Finally, someone asked what was to be done with the house. The tinsel stopped moving altogether and began moving violently in the opposite direction. The tinsel stopped responding after that question, so they moved back to the Ouija board. No sooner had they done this when it spelled out a very cryptic message, BURNIT. They then sprint out of there and call the volunteer fire department. About 7 years ago, my wife and I were on a road trip driving past a provincial park in NW, Ontario, after its official closure from the season, and decided to drop in and spend a few hours having a picnic lunch by a lake. The park was totally deserted with the ranger/check station closed, but the park gate opened, and unmanned we drove past and drove down the roads to the campgrounds a few miles in. She had to use the washroom, so I pull up to a group of outhouses that are there for the campers. I park about 20 feet away and sat in the truck staring at the woods while she went into one of them. It was a sunny, quiet, peaceful day. Then after a few minutes, she came back into the truck, slams the door and shouts at me, "What is your problem?" I'm shocked and said, "What are you talking about?" And she says, "There's 3 outhouses. Could you have used one of them instead of trying to get to mine?" I said, "What?" She said, "Almost the whole time I was in there, you kept rattling and pulling the door trying to get in. I thought you were trying to break it." I told her that I didn't know what she was talking about. I said, "What the hell? I was here the whole time. There was no way I was there. You would have heard the truck open." We then went quiet and stared at each other, realizing just how quiet it is. I snap out of it and gunned the truck out of there, and we never came back to that park. I wouldn't even go within 100 miles of it. This happened 2 years ago, and since the anniversary just passed, I thought I should finally share my story. My fiancé and I were on the second night of our 2-night camping trip at a popular campground about half an hour from where I lived. Now, we live in a predominantly white, conservative and racist area. That part is important, and my husband is black. On our first night, we keep hearing noises in the woods around us. The campsite right beside our one to the right is occupied, but the one to our left is not. The campsites are about 150 yards apart, and we had camped here in the exact same plot the year before. Needless to say, we were familiar with the area and the various kinds of animals that lived in the woods. The first night we heard shuffling around our tent. It was obvious something large had moved around. We brushed it off and assumed it was just a deer. Now back to the main event. On August 11, we spent the day at the battlefields, a town over, with my family. They'd all been invited to join us for the day, but my fiancé, as a surprise for me, proposed to me. We stayed with my family into the evening, at about 6 p.m, before heading back to our campsite. When we got back, things were really odd. Someone had obviously been in our tent. Our blankets were thrown around and clothes were on the floor, backpack being rearranged, but hey, we were stupid 19-year-olds and decided that since whoever had busted in hadn't taken anything, everything's fine. We set up a campfire and sat out until it's dark, roasting hot dogs and s'mores, smoking cigarettes and celebrating our engagement. Around 9:30 p.m, we put out the fire and decided to go into our tent for the night to celebrate a little more. Now, we immediately hear noises outside of the tent again, but this time we focus in. We heard clear footsteps at this point, a man whispering. We look at each other with our eyes wide. Someone was definitely walking around our tent. We were still and completely silent, just listening to the footsteps we heard whispering again. There's two men around there. As if we had the ability to read minds, my fiancé said, "I have to go to the bathroom," and I agreed. The bathroom was up the hill from our site. Most people who are in lower sites like ours drove their cars up to the bathroom. Now, here's the part where I get chills. We got up and were getting dressed, and my fiancé just turned on a light in our tent, put his blinder on, when a man spoke directly in front of us saying, "What are you doing?" I can't even describe how malicious and menacing his voice sounds. It was clearly directed at us. He said it with a horrible tone. He was watching us through the tent. Again, because we're stupid, we decided to just go and run to the car. My fiancé grabbed his pocket knife and keys and stepped out of the tent. He pulled me with him and we ran like hell to the car. I heard footsteps running behind us, and then turning and running up to another campsite. At the bathroom, we talk over our options. We talk about sleeping in the car or driving to another town. Then, we have another idea. We drive back down to our campsite and begin packing up everything to the car. It was around midnight. We moved faster than I think either of us actually could be able to, wrapping up the tent with our belongings still in it, grabbing our folding chairs. We were all packed in 5 minutes and hopped into the car to leave. I jumped out at the end of the drive and grabbed our nameplate. As we pulled out of the campsite, I realised we can finally see the assailants. Stalking through the woods onto our campsite were tall white men. I realised they were the same men that had been driving past the campsite the whole time, just glaring at us, muttering. One was wearing camo hunting gear, the other had a Confederate flag tank top, both carrying hunting knives. They have them in a way that they're ready to attack. They turned when they saw our car, and one started to make chase until the other stopped him. I made eye contact with the man in camo, and he smiles the most terrifying smile I have ever seen in my life. He just shakes his head slowly as we got away. We drove the long way home. We're taking the hardest roads back. When we got home, we told my dad everything, and he shrugs it off as us being paranoid. So I never told anybody else really. I am convinced to this day that it was going to be a racially motivated attack. The campground's not heavily populated, and my fiancé was the only non-white person at the campsites. It was no accident that the two men had been shadowing us since our arrival and wore Confederate flags and had one on their truck. I still get chills when I think about it and how close we were to being killed or seriously hurt that night, and just how lucky it was that our reckless plan had actually worked to get out of there. This was truly the scariest, most horrible thing that's ever happened to me. I've never been so petrified in my life. To this day, I don't know who this man was or what he was trying to do, or if he's still where I saw him. I'm sorry for how long the geographical description is. I just want everyone to understand how truly secluded I was when this happened, how badly it could have ended if it weren't for my parents. So I was back for the summer for the first time after starting university. Our home was, or still is, just outside of a small town with forest all around. There's also a small lake by it, which was diverged from a river that ran for miles through the forest and ran into a few streams east of the lake. Near my home, there was a small grassy path which led to the river following a stream. It was a long walk, but one I used to go on often as a child. I knew the forest there well. I knew where I could cut through the dense trees to make the stream. The walk I would go on always led me off the path which turns northwest slowly, so away from the stream, and then took a sharp turn west after a few miles, at which point the stream was hidden quite deep into the forest. I'd continue to walk north and follow the stream through the forest to get to the river, then follow the river west to get to the lake. It's easy to get lost in this forest because the terrain isn't just a slope down to the water, it goes up and down, and you end up completely surrounded by trees. I'd spent many days wandering around there alone or with my dad over the span of 18 years. I never saw anybody else there. I went there twice that summer, both times alone-ish. The first time I left in the morning, I walked along the path from the stream to the sharp bend, then cutting into the forest. I reached the stream after an hour or so. As I was running my hands through the water, I heard a bell from far away, coming from the north. Something was making a bell ring frequently and periodically, which I found strange. I listened well, wondering if it was a lost dog or something, and start moving towards the sound. I bloody know I'd be the first person to die, but I was heading north anyway, so what the hell. I realised it could have been an animal. I could tell the bell was heavy. I don't think it's an animal now, because it's so clear that it's not on a collar. I kept moving, and the bell was moving away from me. It then completely stops. The stream wasn't big enough or strong enough to carry a bell. That could have been enclosed in a tin or something. The river was too fast still. I thought of everything, but nothing could explain the sound apart from one obvious thing, which I just didn't feel comfortable with for some reason. I knew it had to be a person. I stopped thinking about it and just walked on normally. Until I found a badger, one that was dead. It was laying weirdly, and it wasn't as though an animal had attacked it. The smell was really bad too. Now the sound of the bell had been following the stream, so had I, and the badger was put there. Maybe it even died there. It was really weird. Now nothing else happens that day. Now 1 week later, I went back for the second time that summer and last time ever. I left home at around 6 PM. I made it to the stream, then walk into the river. It's an hour, and then decide to go back the way I came because it's getting late and it was raining heavily. The sun set around 9 PM. I was walking as fast as I could. The sound of the rain and the trees seemed surreal and loud. I knew that somewhat trotting with my head down for a while through the clearest and most open parts of the forest might not have been the best idea when I bumped into something quite heavy. The smell was horrible, and there's another badger. It's just not natural how it's been placed there from a tree. It looks like it's a load of blocks put together. I gagged. As I walked into it, fluid fell on me. It was repulsive. At first I just stared at it, gobsmacked. What animal could do this? I was soaked in rain, and my senses are overwhelmed yet confused. It felt like a bucket of ice water had been thrown over me when I realised that I walked the same way to get to the river, so someone had put it up there after I passed it, knowing I'd see it. So, someone was watching me, running around the forest where the faint sounds of branches are breaking around me, and they're not animals. I look around and start my run. I was half running, half walking away from the stream back towards the path for a while when I heard the bell again. I proceeded to call my dad while running. I told him to meet me on the path where it sharply turns west. It was the closest part of the path to me, to go as fast as he could, and that someone's in the forest. I can't explain the feeling I had. It was like I just shut out my intense stomach feeling. I literally felt the hairs on my neck raise despite it being wet. It was dark. I jog as fast as I can. I'm panicking because the path is far away and I do not feel safe. It was still raining. Every single sound is muffled. I felt like everything was further away than ever before. The bell went on for longer than last time, on and off. I felt like it was surrounding me at one point. The fear combined with my compromised hearing and the fact that I couldn't flip and breathe properly was making me slightly loose of my sense of direction. I was automatically heading southwest, but I was really sure that I might not be going the right way. I was breathing like a goddamn horse, coughing my lungs up, kind of crying out loud like a toddler does, tripping over leaves and twigs like an idiot. I stayed on the phone with my mum, who was on her way with my dad. I kept hearing sounds, but I wasn't sure what they were. My mum was screaming on the phone at the same time that they're on the path and that I need to run. Now apparently my dad had actually gotten out and was heading east from the path behind. I was so terrified I went into survival mode. I was doing the half running, half speed walking again because I'm out of breath. But then, I heard branches break, clear footsteps for the first time from down in the forest, and the bell ringing louder now. I don't dare to look over my shoulder. That's when I first saw what was in the forest with me, a tall figure creeping in my direction at the very end of the clearing, ringing this bell in front of his stomach. I could tell he was staring straight at me. Now, I don't know if I had a hidden secret, sprinting ability, or instinctual adrenaline-induced superhuman powers, but when I tell you I ran for my life, I really mean it. I screamed out, "I'm on the phone to the police. They're on the path with you. Dad, I can see you. I'm here." I wanted to yell, "Dad, please tell me where you are," but of course I was too smart for that. I felt like something awful was about to happen. I felt like the man was right behind me. I kept telling myself not to look back. I was gasping and wheezing, crying so hard that my eyes hurt. I feel shivers. I've never felt fear quite like it. It doesn't feel real. This just can't be happening to me. My legs feel like they're not working. I finally hear my dad shouting my name, and I knew he was coming my way and that he could see me because of the intuition of his voice. I pretty much lunged at him. We catch one another. My dad heard the bell too. My mum could hear it on the phone waiting in the car. We went directly to the police station. I got medical attention soon after. My dad burst into tears in the car, said he could hear the bell, and thought he wouldn't be able to see me. Asked if I didn't have my phone, and what would have happened then. They were almost as terrified as me because they witnessed everything through the call. They could hear me running and the danger and couldn't see it. The police couldn't really do much. They searched the area and they just found a folded up t-shirt under a rock. And my bag was never recovered. They said it was probably someone homeless in the forest, but what actually happened to me that day just doesn't make sense for somebody to be homeless. I'm not blaming anyone. The entire thing's my fault. There are just so many what ifs. I want to believe it was just someone who decided to live in the woods and hunt, but were a bit mentally unstable and they felt anger that I come into their territory, but this was too insidious. This was too planned and methodic. They must have known that I was out there alone, and that I was far from help. To this day, I can't bloody go anywhere near where I'm gonna be alone or the sound of bells. I struggle with the smell of moss too. Anyway, I'm so thankful for my parents and my phone that I was able to actually write this now, because God knows what would have happened if I didn't have them two things. This story took place over 30 years ago and is from my childhood. Now, I didn't live too far away from some fields and a forest, and I would often go there just to have some nice fresh air and to get away from everything. This all changed one day, however. It wasn't a product of my own complacency, more so randomness that I'm going to get into. Now, I set off on this day like all my others, happy and at a nice comfortable walk-in pace. I have to go through a couple of fields and jump a gate, move past a power line, and just jump over a small stream. Now I'm at the start of the forest. There's moss covering most of the trees here. I know my way round pretty well, so I never worry too much. I feel very at peace here, but I don't like to overstay, because I know it can take a while to get back, and my thoughts can sometimes turn on me. So I continue like normal. I decide to stop for a second. I have a strange feeling that something's off, that I can't quite put my finger on. The feeling actually doesn't go away, and it's kind of frustrating. I decide to just close my eyes and lay back for a second. That turns into a 10-minute nap. I check my watch. I think, wow, it's been 3 hours, but I look again, it's only been 10 minutes. As I open my eyes, I get a little confused and readjust to my surroundings. I know I'm still in the same spot because my bag's there, but there are rocks that have perfectly been arranged in a circle around me, along with a big X next to my bag. I know for a fact that I haven't done this in my sleep. I call out for anyone, and suddenly, I hear a strange tapping on a tree further in the distance. I don't bother sticking around to investigate. I grab my bag and begin to sprint back as fast as I possibly can. I never went back to that forest, and I never told anyone about my experience until now. I still have no idea what the hell that was or what it could have meant. I still get nightmares sometimes just thinking about it. Even now, I'm starting to feel paranoid and feeling my palms sweat just typing this. This happened many years ago, when I was 17. I'm now a 30-year-old male for context. When I was a teenager, I lived in Marin County, a quiet suburb just north of San Francisco. However, most of my buddies lived in San Francisco, and most nights I could be found riding my bike around from and across Golden Gate Bridge. I really enjoyed long bicycle rides at night. I'd often be high as a kite, iPod on my favourite playlist, passing by weirdos and street urchins, admiring the desolate beauty of the bay. One of my favourite places to ride my bike was through Poseido. Poseido is the last neighbourhood you pass in San Francisco before making your way onto the Golden Gate Bridge. It's famous for its old and beautiful military housing. There's also enormous eucalyptus trees and forestry. At night, it's dead and quiet, and the only people you can see out are late-night Chinese fishermen on the pier down by the water, or people flying down the freeway into the city. Anyway, this one night I was coming back from hanging out with some friend, riding my bike through there on the way home. It was leisurely, going past the hills and the trees, when I noticed a single older black car, something like an Oldsmobile, coming up on a perpendicular road to me. As I get closer, it took a left, blinding me for a moment as it passes. I don't think much of it at the time, but here and there you might see a couple cruising to go and make out by the bridge, or a car full of kids gonna smoke something near there at the old pet cemetery beneath the highway. A few minutes later, I had mostly climbed up the hill, and that takes me closer to the entrance of the bridge that looks down on Crissy Field. This road is dark with barely any lights, and I was enjoying looking down towards the water to my right when I noticed a car coming from behind me. I looked behind me and saw the same old black Oldsmobile maybe 20 yards behind me with its lights off, driving very strangely at a crawl speed. I tried to wave past them, but the car just keeps on strolling slowly behind me. It was too dark to see who might be driving. The fact that the car had its lights off almost immediately struck me as a red flag, as well as the fact that it was deliberately tailgating me. I gave it a few more yards and tried to wave it past, but nothing. I'm now spooked. I took a sharp left on my bicycle and began bombing down the hill in the opposite way. This route would take me back deeper into a more secluded wooded area by the cemetery and air hangars. For a moment, I felt relieved until I heard a screeching of car wheels and glanced behind me to see the Oldsmobile with its lights off now passing behind the trees coming down the same hill as me. Now the Oldsmobile would have had to have made an extremely unusual U-turn, especially considering how narrow the roads are. Terrified now, I began pedaling faster away from the Oldsmobile, but as I pick up pace, so does the Oldsmobile. Using all my strength, I go as quick as I can up a hill, through some trees, jumping off the bike. I now run to find a bush to hide in. Hanging off the side of the hill, hidden in ivy, I was just below the road. I look up, but couldn't see anything. I suddenly hear the car pass and wait a few minutes before I heard it slowly approaching, no indication from headlights, and then pass by again and again for nearly 20 minutes or so, and I'm terrified hiding in the bush. Finally, I mustered the courage to get back on my bicycle, riding as fast as I possibly can back to the bridge. In the darkness, listening to myself pant. It felt like forever, but finally, I can see the glaring lights of the Golden Gate Bridge. But then again, I heard the car. I look behind me to see it. I smash through and make it to the parking lot. I rode up the pedestrian sidewalk next to the toll, get off my bike, under the light and chain smoke for a while. I never saw the car again on the bridge, nor did I see it again when I made it back to Marin. Back when I was younger, I used to enjoy going for walks through a forested area to go and see my friend. Now, it wasn't a very long walk, but the woods were long enough to get lost in. I had my good friend. I would always go and see him, and we'd always hang out. Never in the forest per se, but we always passed through it to get to things we wanted to do, and this day was no different. I've already met up with my friend now, and we're just going through a pass. As we do so, we notice an overwhelming smell of smoke. This is weird because we've never really smelt it like this before. We think maybe a building's on fire near us. We end up sitting down and talking for a while. We know we're going to be too early for the film we're going to watch, so we decide just to hunker down. Within about 10 minutes, we realise that visibility's dropped and the smell of smoke is truly overwhelming. We get up and realise that there's actually a fire only a few meters away from us. We look around and panic sets in as we realise that about half of the forest is actually on fire, and we're trapped. We both let out screams as we realise what's happening, and due to parts of the burnt forest we can't actually figure out which way we need to go to get out. I tell my friend to cover his face with his shirt and just follow me. There's only one way we can get out, down a small stream, and I know roughly where it should be. It's now getting very hot around us and I can hear fire engines in the distance. We end up making it to the stream and we literally have to jump in because there's fire on both sides of us. We make it through and eventually manage to make it to a road. Now what makes this even more terrifying is that it come into the local news a few days later that a crazy person was trying to set fire to this whole forest knowing there were people in it. The fact that me and my friend were sitting there talking so oblivious still haunts me to this day. When I was younger, every year for Christmas I would drive upstate to my aunt's house along a stretch of highway. I can't for the life of me remember the road. All I know is that it runs near Aachen, New York at some point. It's mostly a drive through rural areas with little to no towns nearby. So it's the dead of night, and my groggy self has gotten off a long shift and had to drag myself to my aunt's house since my extended family was expecting me the following morning. Near halfway through the drive I realise I'm very low on gas. It annoys me. My brother told me he filled it up, but he hasn't. I saw an archaic looking sign for a gas station off the next road. It wasn't an official road sign, literally a pole with a slab of metal attached with gas off the next exit or something. That seemed a little sketchy, but people do the same thing with fruit stands on the highway, so whatever. I pull off of the next exit on some dilapidated country road through dense woods. The whole thing was creepy and surreal. I kept expecting Leatherface to come running at me. Eventually I come to the gas station and realise quickly that it's not been open for years. It was all rusted and the convenience store roof is caving in. The gas pumps had all been taken out as well. I pull over next to it and check my gauge. I would probably only make it another half mile before running out, so I called AAA and they said they're gonna send a truck. Now the waiting game. I left my engine on because of the headlights, and it's pitch black, and my paranoid self didn't want to be sitting next to an abandoned gas station in the dark for what felt like forever. So most of the wait is actually uneventful, until I sense movement around the side of the old store where my lights are pointed. I look up and didn't see anything more, so I look back down at my phone. Then, over the sound of the night, I hear someone yell, "Hey buddy, come here," in a demanding tone. I look up and there's a guy standing by the old store staring down at me, illuminated by my headlights. He looks like a run-of-the-mill homeless guy. I was spooked and figured that he must have been squatting there watching me. I say, "Yeah, what's up? You got any change?" "Nah, sorry man." I look up at him and he has this vacant expression. Then I see more movement. There are heads, about 20 or so, peeking around the trees beyond the man I'm talking to. I can't see them clearly, but there are definitely people there. Literally just heads, staring in the direction from around the trees. I then see another guy beginning to walk from around the gas station, so I peel off. I get as far away from that place as I can, and update the AAA on my location. The driver came back over and filled me up. I didn't say anything, but he left, and I want to call the cops. I called the nearest sheriff department. When I get to my aunt's house, they called me back and said they're all gone, but they found a lot of different signs that people have been living there. The whole situation freaks me out, but frankly, I consider myself lucky to be able to even tell this story, knowing that nothing happened to me. My mum was always very cautious of the bad things that could happen to her children. She would take all three of us, my brother, sister and I, to school, all at the same time in the morning, and she works very close to where the school is. I remembered I was begging to bike to school since I got a new bike for my birthday, and she agrees. I was in grade 7, so 12 or 13. My school was a 2 to 3 minute drive away, and probably a 10-minute bike ride. I was eager to ride my new bike to school, as I also had gotten a new helmet and lock as well. School starts at about 9, so I left at 8. I liked to hang out in the yard with my friends before school started, so I would always go earlier. The route to school was pretty much one straight line, and we get into the city. Now it's 8 o'clock in the morning, so it's relatively bright out again. I'm on a well-populated main road. So I'm about halfway to school, and I decide to cross the street, but not at a crosswalk or traffic light, just kind of jaywalk in. I'm looking both ways though, and I noticed a black car pull up to my left near the woods. It's a Honda Civic, and there's 2 young guys in there, well, sort of young, but they've got tinted windows, and I don't think much of it. The only thing that crosses my mind is, maybe I was blocking them from their driveway and continued down. From the corner of my eye though, I saw a man dressed in all black with his hood popped up, hide his face, get out to the driver's side and walk around the back of the car to the passenger side before I realise what's happening. He's opening the passenger door, and he's pulling me by the arm off my bike trying to get me in. After what felt like an eternity, it was like every car on the street had disappeared. Any sign of help was gone. I'm on one of the busiest streets in my city, and it feels like a graveyard. It really feels like one of them nightmares where you can't actually do anything. You just lay there and suffer until you wake up. Now, these things don't really happen in my city, so I'm not really prepared for this. Now, the first thing that comes to my mind is to aim for the nuts. I shifted my weight to my right leg and kick as hard as I possibly can. Landing one kick, I actually hurt my ankle, so I can't imagine how it felt receiving that. I didn't even look before I crossed the street, biking as fast as I can. I remember trying to turn around to get a license plate, but my eyes are very watery from fear. I knew my mum wouldn't have been at work, so I continued biking to school silently crying. I pull into the schoolyard and drop my bike off. I didn't care to lock it or ever ride it anywhere again. My school's front door is locked 24/7, and you had to ring a doorbell to get in. The serenity reminded me that I still had time to play outside before class starts, and that's when I finally speak again. I need to call my mum. I scream and the door opens instantly. I explain what happened to the secretary, then the principal, and my mum and the police. Now, a business across the street had some surveillance footage, but you can only see the bottom 6 inches of the guy's car pulling up, so that was no use. Apparently, the same guy with the same description went on an attempt to kidnap 3 other girls but never got caught. I don't really believe in God, but I do pray that he/whatever it was never successful. Now, I'm new to Reddit, but this is my experience. So this happened when I was a lot younger. I want to say freshman in high school, probably like 2008. There used to be this road near where I lived in CA called Croak Road. It was barely a road. No one travelled on it, and it was surrounded by small patches of forest and some abandoned barns and houses. I would typically go there with my friends to skateboard and hang out. This one night, I was hanging out with 2 of my friends, Lucas and Durain, and somebody wanted to go to Croak Road and hang out since it's creepy. It might sound lame, but we loved exploring like a bunch of 5th graders that weren't really into smoking or anything like that. I asked my 20-year-old brother James if he could drive us down into one of the nature reserves by the road. This specific reserve was larger than the others and had a network of gravel paths leading through it, Basically, we were looking for unexplored territory to hike in. Soon, one particular path we're travelling down becomes so narrow that James thought Explorer couldn't pass through it, so we got out and walked for a while, chatting, having fun. We go through the woods for about an hour until it had gotten relatively dark out and the sun's gone, at which point we turn around and head back to the car. It's now I should mention that despite being near a lot of sub-developments, this patch of forest is huge and rarely visited since it was so easy to get lost in, especially at night. It was a challenge getting the car turned around, but James manages it, and we're going down the road. Derain proposed that we turn down a different path which we had passed by earlier, since we had about another 40 minutes until our parents want us back, and we agree. Down this path was a tiny pond Derain wanted to check out and take pictures at, since he hadn't got the opportunity to go at night. It was slow going since the road was even creepier than the main one we're on, but we turned off Croak Road. Minutes later, we got into a slight argument. Derain was convinced James had taken a wrong turn since we shouldn't have arrived at the pond by now, while James claimed that he had been driving straight the whole time. Eventually we come to a fork in the road that none of us are familiar with. None of us knew which way to go, so we ended up guessing and going left, hoping that both directions would ultimately lead back to the main path. None of us were scared or anything. In fact, we were actually excited and intrigued, driving through seemingly the middle of nowhere at night. It was at this point we rounded a small bend in the road and the headlights fell upon a surreal sight. There's 4 figures emerging from the forest crossing the road wearing what appears to be cloaks. One guy at the back was dragging a large duffel bag. We all froze and stopped mid-conversation, and as soon as our high beams landed on the 4 figures, they freeze too. James pulled up to the left and went around them. Driving past them really felt like an eternity though, because we couldn't have been going over 5 miles per hour due to the condition of the road. Sitting in the passenger seat, I could see them inches behind my window, and they're indeed wearing black robes. I didn't get a good look at the bag, but judging by the way the guy was, something heavy is inside the bag. None of us said a word until the road straightened out, and we're far past those guys. At which point, James mutters, "What the hell was that?" We continued down the road in silence, and I heard Lucas say, "Wow, they're coming back." I twisted around in my chair to see Lucas pointing out the back window. I could barely see anything, but about 100 yards away we saw the beams of 4 flashlights shaking erratically. The guys were without a doubt running after us, all of them screaming. We start to tell James to step on it. The car bounces and shakes uncontrollably as we flew over beams and potholes. Thank God we did manage to get back to the main path. James gunned it down the path until we're popped off by Croak Road and we get the hell out of there. This is the weirdest thing though. The creepiest thing that I realised is none of them had a vehicle, so they must have been about 50 miles away from anything and they were just out there in the woods with that body thing in the bag. We ended up calling the cops, but they can't find anything. I never told my parents about it until writing this. I haven't really shared it with anyone. It's very important you report suspicious people. I still wish to hell to know how they got there, where they were going, and what was in the bag. Though sometimes I think it's better for me not to know. Hey folks, I'm kind of new to this, but this happened just after I went to a Christmas Eve party when everyone goes home and I decide to stay because my cousin and I were watching a movie. My uncle, who used to walk his dogs in the woods next to a park, went off to take them out. Before this, my aunt told him don't do that because it's too dark out there, and around 5 AM. He didn't care. He went off anyway. My aunt was still worried, so I went along with him. Once we're actually there, nothing wrong really seems to happen. My uncle and his dogs are just relaxing. and I don't really pay much attention to the surroundings when suddenly the dogs go still. This wasn't strange. They always do this and stare and bark at animals, but this time it was different. When the dogs got still, my uncle and I noticed that something was wrong. The dog wasn't angry or anything, just kind of nervous and anxious or afraid. One of the dogs, the largest one, was growling and shaking. As my uncle started to get worried about the situation, we heard it. People in the woods. We couldn't actually see how many were there because of the darkness. Now we hear, we're all gathered here by the blood of we, thee, and thy. As my uncle and I heard that, he yelled for his dogs to follow him out of the woods. As we all left, he turned his back, and we only see a slight movement in the shrubs. Maybe these people were trying to hide. We ended up quickly getting the dogs and getting out of there. We never actually took the time to investigate who they were or what they were doing, but after that happened, my uncle didn't take his dogs near those woods ever again, and is very scared of being out late now. When I was 7 years old, my father took my older brother and I to a cabin in the middle of nowhere as a vacation. We also took our cat with us. Everyone has their own room. I had the room furthest from the other two, positioned right next to where the wood starts. There was a window right next to my bed, and on the right side, and there was a tree right next to it that I remembered getting to climb in the previous day without success. The bedrooms were on the second floor, by the way, and the window didn't have any curtains or blinds to cover it. Now one night, I remembered feeling homesick and unable to sleep. The cats are laying on the bed with me. I was reading comic books at around 2 AM when I heard tapping on my window. I assume it's a branch tapping on the window because it's windy, but I hear whispers now. I remember just freezing in my fear, feeling like a bunch of ice water's being poured on me. I could hear whoever it was tapping saying, "Let me in," and my name, "It's cold out here." I just want to cuddle. I was paralyzed by fear. I just lay there, facing away from the window, terrified close to tears. I've honestly never had anything like this before. I was so paralyzed by fear that I just faced away from the window. I knew it wasn't my father. He kept saying that, but it's a lie and it's my imagination. I grabbed my cat, feeling safer with him, my only defense. I couldn't believe this guy had the nerve to call himself my dad. I didn't know who he was or what he wanted. I hear a screeching sound now, like somebody's got a pocket knife against glass. Now the grin disappears on his face and he just looks like he's horrified and absolutely full of rage. At that moment, my father come barreling into my room with his hunting rifle, and as you can imagine, seeing this made him panic and sort of drop backwards. My father just looked at me to make sure I was alright, just as my brother came running in. He wants to catch him, but unfortunately he got away. To this day, I don't think they ever caught the guy. I remember my father filing a police report. Sadly, they never actually found this guy, and he might still be out there to this day.